Grand Existence Cosmopolitans, I'm Nicholas Jensen Denton, and this is JD's Pharmacopoeia. I have gathered you here today because I need to explain why I've done some things, okay? I've done some things in a certain type of way, and I'm sure I had a lot of questions that led up to the unfolding of these events, and it was a long journey trying to answer them, but here we go. This is the culmination of all my actions. This is a Chaga spagyric triply extracted plant medicine. As we know, spagyric is a purification of the spirit, body, and soul of a plant, mineral, or organic person, life, thing. Life is a spagyric, so it's not a thing. It could also be a non-thing. Anyways, Chaga. Triple extract, started with a dual extract, ended with the bodily calcination. Now, what is the dual extraction? That seems to be the big question that people are asking. Now, I don't know if you can see it right now, but here on the board, I've got water and I've got alcohol. And these are our two main solvents when we think about performing extractions on plants and fungi. And what we find is that the solvent, or the solvent, as I like to think of it, is incredibly important in deciding when you are choosing. The solvent is incredibly important. Which one you choose for which specific plant or animal or mineral is incredibly important in terms of the effectiveness and the bioavailability of the constituents of that medicine you're looking to extract. Now, chaga, for example, or actually, I don't know if this applies directly to chaga, but for mushrooms in general, their cell walls are made of chitin, and that is the same type of material that makes up seashells. Now, I say this because plant medicine and making plant medicine, especially practical applied plant alchemy, is about how to extract the totality of life-giving qualities from a plant so that it can be assimilated by the human being. This means, how are we extracting the active constituents and the bioavailable compounds in their completeness from the plant? Now, this is really the science of medicine making. And when we think about making something bioavailable, what that really means is to bypass all the natural defenses of the body, such as first pass digestion and the blood-brain barrier and all these different mechanisms that are put in play. Like if you were just to eat a fungus, like I said, it's made out of chitin, so you can imagine if you ate some seashells, how difficult that would be to digest. That's because your stomach lacks the chitinase, the enzyme required to break down the chitin so that you can absorb the medicinal compounds. Now, if there is some medicinal complex, or if there is a synergy between multiple active medicinal complexes in a mushroom that you are, as a patient, as somebody who's sick and trying to heal, and you are seeking those, and you can't just get it directly through eating, right? That's why for thousands of years, we have eaten things and we've drank water, but we've also made medicines and decoctions in water for thousands of years so that we can extract or get a different aspect of an organism available to us, right? Because we know that some things, it may be therapeutic, but in the right dosage or the wrong quality, it could be poison, right? It was right what Paracelsus said about alcohol. It's sustenance, nourishment, or medicine. Depends on the quality and the quantity. And if you ask me, the intentions of the user. So this leads us up to our solvents, our solvents. Now, if you don't know, in alchemy, the soul is the essential oils of a plant. So a solvent is something that would allow the soul. Coincidentally, the solvent is removing the soul, the individuating aspect, out of the plant material. And so I just see this combination of words, like who is putting together language? That's a big question to the occultists. Like, what is language? So these things which vent our souls, otherwise known as the solvents, sometimes it's water. I don't know if you can see this. Maybe. Sometimes it's water, sometimes it's alcohol. And what we have in plant-based extractions is typically we use a concentration of alcohol, something that's been tested before, something like, say, 25, 35, 45% alcohol, 65% water, 35, you see? So there's actually a coordination of both. Now, we wouldn't call this particularly a dual extraction. We would just call this an alcohol extraction, because in most alcohols, you have a portion of water, because alcohol is basically water, and it can very easily form water, and water can very easily form alcohol through reactions at equilibrium. In fact, they do interchange all the time. And so the question that is asked in extracting is, what is the right concentration of alcohol to water are we going to use in order to extract the completeness and the totality, and what the kids are saying, the entourage, the full spectrum of plant compounds from the specific medicine that we are seeking to extract. Now, you go out and you do research like me, like I did. I'm still doing research. So if anything I say is wrong, or I'm open to opinions and scientific articles and sharing knowledge, because I haven't read all the scientific research. I can't. But you certainly have probably read things that I haven't. But this is where my reading has led me. It's interesting. Scientific research is a very fallible process. Humans and their writing is a fallible process. So what we have to really go by is our experience and the experience of other people who we trust with our lives and with our health and wellness. And in my experience, and in communicating through people I trust, what I discovered, what I've learned, what I've found out is that this dual extraction methodology, it's very enigmatic. People will say one thing but not know really why they're saying it, or they would say something else and immediately contradict themselves. Like, there's a lot of just ambiguity and mystery surrounding the correct process of extraction. What I have come to conclude is that basically we can use water for a lot of these extractions. For thousands upon thousands of years, we've used water and simple plant-based decoctions to not only heal our bodies, but to migrate the soul. And it's these simple decoctions and these ethnobotanical usages that they're always talking about that, we've essentially lost in the Western world, and that we have stamped out. Well, I mean, that knowledge was basically sequestered by the powers that shouldn't be, and the knowledge was, quote, lost. It was stamped out. People were murdered. It was taken out of the education system intentionally so that we would... That's another topic. I don't want to digress, because we're here for dual extractions. But we got to understand what the purpose really of healing and health and wellness is, so that we don't overcomplicate things and fall down this ludicrous rabbit hole of phytochemistry, where we find one compound inside of astragalus which turns around to be like toxic in certain proportions, right? Talking to these chemists is difficult, because you're like, hi, I want to extract these things out of this plant, and they're like, well, I wouldn't do that. There are phenols in there. There are things in there which are incredibly poison, cancer causing. It's like, yeah, okay, we know this. There's mercury in the human body, but that doesn't mean that we're poisoned. It means that homeostasis is operating functionally. So I take a lot of heed, or I don't know if that's the correct use of that word, but listen to what people have to say, but it's not all black and white as most people would say, especially chemists. There's much more to the universe than what meets the atomic spectroscopy. So what we find beyond the spectroscopy is that what was that? Is that the thermostat? How the camera turned off. So what we find is that in dual extractions, now let's zoom in here so you can actually see. In dual extractions, we've got water and alcohol. Now this R, ethanol. Eth means two. That's what R means also too. All, O-L-F-N, all means alcohol. So we have our alcohol right here. And then we have our water right here. And in chemistry, which is basically a symbol for life, they talk about energy in terms of electronegativity. And one thing about energy and chemistry is very interesting is that energy, the energy of an atom, of a nucleus, is actually stored in these bonds here, which are the energy between two protons is stored in the sharing of electrons. Now, I think that's important because bonds are non-physical connections. There's no physical object connecting these two things, but the strength and the power of the compound truly lies in this non-physical phenomena. I still don't know if you can see that or not, but I'm really praying you can. Maybe a different color will help. That helps a little bit. So we've got our water here. And so the question becomes, when we are extracting compounds in the full spectrum out of these plants, how do we get the full spectrum? And what is the full spectrum? So essentially, we can break this up. Oops. Essentially, we're going to zoom out here for another second. Essentially, we can break this up and understand that there are macromolecules and there are micromolecules. There are very large molecules which are made, they're, polysaccharides, fats, lipids, membrane-bound organelles, which are very easily denatured, okay? They're membrane-bound, meaning if we have a cell, let's call this a cell, and this so this is the inside of the cell, and this is the outside of the cell. We've got the inside of the cell, and we've got the outside of the cell. What we find is that many things that wellness and health moves along, and like strong relationships and things like that, is good communication. And the body has all these different systems, and it's always communicating with itself. It's always saying, hey, this is what's going on in my toe. This is what's going on in my colon, up here to the brain and the central nervous system, which is this giant self-aware lightning bolt, basically, that's moving through your body all the time, constantly vibrating back and forth to send these messages in some sort of electrical binary code that we don't fully understand. What I'm trying to say is that the communication networks in the body and the electrical signals and impulses in the body are mediated through proteins that exist on the cell walls, in the cell membrane, okay? And so in the cell membrane, we find when people are really sick, and their body starts to eat away at itself and it starts to lose the ability to heal itself, that's because it's basically a communication breakdown. A lot of these polysaccharides function in the communication networks of the immune system, and when we lose that ability, when our cells lose that ability, it begins the process of death and decay. And so to restore this ability, it's interesting what we have to do, because the body, it's not that complicated of an organism. As long as it has certain tools available to itself, like people think that, like, if somebody wants to consume if somebody needs, like, say, well, let's just say that the body, it gets a lot of its energy through, all of its energy is stored in different energetic vehicles in the body, which are mediated via the inclusion or the exclusion of electrons or protons, which are positively or negatively or neutrally charged. And this biochemistry, basically, it's really it's really mediated, and homeostasis is mediated through chemical equilibrium and biochemical signals. And these biochemical signals, they're important because they're stored in the outer membrane of the cell. Now, if we were to do an extraction on a cell, on a plant, which has unique immunoregulating compounds in its cell membrane, right? And we were to use alcohol for that extraction, what would happen, and what the research has shown that I've read, is that the alcohol will come in and actually denature the cell membrane, right? It'll break down the cell walls. You see, I erased the little tick marks that I made. It'll break down the cell wall so that this thing basically disappears, rendering its contents, what was inside of it, available to solubilize into the ethanol solution. So to denature something, like these polysaccharides and these macromolecules that are important for cell communication, means that they're no longer available in the body to do work. Now, like I was saying, the body, like if the body needs something for itself, it doesn't build it up from scratch. If it has a piece of it over there from some food that it ate, and a piece of it over there for some plant medicine that it ate, and a piece of it over here from the air that it absorbed, or from something that it touched in the environment, it will take all of these things and whatever is the most energetically profitable means of producing or healing itself, it will use those tools available to it to create that healing, to create that equilibrium, to create the compounds or the pathways to repair itself in whichever way that it needs to maintain that homeostasis. So, but what we find in doing alcohol and ethanol extractions first is that this denaturing renders them unavailable to the medicine. And so if you're doing an alcohol maceration, decoction on a fungi, you're going to lose a lot of those healing compounds, those polysaccharides, those lipids, those macromolecules, which are some of the most like therapeutic and actively sought after medicinal compounds in mushrooms. People talk about reishi and lion's mane and oyster mushroom, and why these things are so medicinal is because of these unique, readily available compounds that exist in their cell membranes, these larger molecules. And so when we use the alcohol extraction, or if we do the alcohol extraction first, then we will not, then it's a waste of time. You're denaturing the medicine. You're not going to get your healing compounds. This will not be therapeutic. You might as well just drink some distilled water or something, because that's basically the same thing. It's almost nothing. It will do nothing, okay? You're not making medicine. You're just making mistakes, okay? In my humble opinion. Now in chemistry, we're talking about energy and how the bonds are stored in the thing. I got a little sidetracked. I apologize. But what I was saying about these non-physical compounds, about these non-physical bonds, is that the energy stored in the non-physical bond is actually in movement. It's constantly flowing back and forth between these two poles, right? And so in these bonds, in these poles, chemists have come to term this electronegativity. And this energy, electronegativity, is always flowing towards the thing that is more polar. Now, in this instance, oxygen has much more electronegative energy, and so the energy is flowing from the hydrogen into the oxygen. From the hydrogen into the oxygen. Now, these are what chemists term polar forces. So water is a polar compound. But interestingly, it can dissolve both polar and nonpolar compounds. That is another lesson for now. Just understand that water has a large electronegative value. And then here we also have the one hydrogen, and it is slightly less polar, right? This is only one hydrogen. So we would call that nonpolar. Now, the question becomes,